Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2018 Harmony webinar series. And we're pleased today to be joined with Daniel Lettenberger-Klein with Rivermend Health, who will be talking about cohesive family engagement. For those of you that are new to Harmony Foundation, we are a residential addiction treatment program located in Estes Park, Colorado, right outside of Rocky Mountain National Park. We are a 72-bed facility that offers comprehensive treatment for adults and their family members. Who is Harmony Foundation? Harmony believes that the long-term recovery from alcohol and other drugs is possible. We believe that we're a place between two worlds. Our location in the Rockies provides a safe and quiet respite from the pain of addiction. With over 49 years of treatment now, we have fostered a generation of long-term recovery who supports our clients and families for a lifetime. Harmony staff at all levels of the organization works together to create a community of recovery support that is long-lasting. Again, we are a 70-plus bed residential facility. We offer a full continuum of care, beginning at detox through transitional living. We're located at the base of Rocky Mountain National Park. We offer an evidence-based 12-step program that is gender responsive. If you're interested in learning more about Harmony, we invite you to visit us at harmonyfoundationinc.com, or you can contact our admissions office at 866-686-7867. Just a few housekeeping things to go over before we get started. This is a 1-hour approved NADAC workshop. The evaluations will be completed online after the workshop is complete. They should pop up within the hour after the workshop. You will receive a certificate by email. If you have any issues and you don't receive the certificate, you can reach out to Christy Weeks at cweeks@harmonyfoundationinc.com. Additionally, the speaker today has offered to provide his slide deck to individuals who are interested in it. He'll be providing his email later on in the presentation, as well as answering any questions throughout. I invite you to please be sure to answer questions in the chat box or submit your questions through either the chat box or the question box on your panel on the side. We'll be happy to filter those questions through the course of the webinar. I want to give a special thank you to Rivermend Health for their willingness to partner with us on this workshop. Rivermend, and I know that Daniel will provide you with more information about it, is a fairly new 4 or 5 year old organization that's really grown significantly over the last period of time in looking at addiction treatment and services around the country. And he'll give you more information about that. If you're interested in learning more about Rivermend, feel free to click on the link at rivermendhealth.com. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Daniel. Daniel received his Bachelor of Science in Psychology from Bradley University and his Master of Science in Marriage and Family Therapy from Purdue University. He has worked in every level of substance abuse treatment as a substance abuse counselor, family therapist, and counseling supervisor. His responsibilities included conducting biopsychosocial assessments, creating individualized treatment plans, and providing individual, couple, family, group, and multifamily group therapy. As a supervisor, he oversaw hiring, provided case consultation, and managed staff. Before joining Rivermend Health, he served as the executive and clinical director and later regional director for a detox center with locations in 3 states. In that role, he oversaw the clinical and admissions departments, worked closely with a multidisciplinary team to coordinate patient care, implemented performance improvement initiatives, ensured compliance with Joint Commission accreditation requirements, and worked with leadership teams. Drawn to help those with addictive disorders because of his own family's history of addiction struggles, Daniel's goals are to ensure the admissions process is thorough and inviting and to make sure patients receive individualized, integrated care. He is committed to including families in the recovery process, allowing them to provide important support for their loved ones and that facilitates their own healing. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the workshop over to Daniel.
Hi, how's everybody doing? I know you can't respond, but this is my first time doing a presentation in this format. I hope everyone can see my screen all right. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, Gina, for the introduction. My name is Daniel Lettenberger-Klein. I'm the Regional Executive Director of Operations for Georgia with Rivermend Health, and we have Bluff Plantation located in Augusta, Georgia, which is a residential program with detox services, and we do the full continuum of care as well. Unique to Rivermend is that we have a a very robust eating disorder side of the house with Rosewood Centers for Eating Disorders, with our ranch in Wickenburg, Arizona, and our outpatient services across Arizona, but also in Santa Monica, California, and our professionals program on the chemical dependency side in Chicago as well. So really spread out across the country. Really excited to be here today and be a part of this presentation. So our presentation today is on cohesive family engagement in the PHP-IOP outpatient setting. And just to kind of take a step back with that, PHP-IOP is partial hospitalization program and intensive outpatient programming. In our setting, that's for PHP, that's 6-hour, 5-day-a-week treatment in an outpatient setting from 9 to 3:30 every day. And then within that, there's IOP treatment from 9 to noon, whether that's 3 or 5 days a week, and we offer that both at day and in the evening. So the goals of our presentation today are really to identify barriers for family engagement and name strategies to engage resistant patients and families, and discuss the ways in which ongoing family involvement improves outcomes and long-term stabilization for not only the individual but for the family, and identify complex issues which require family buy-in to improve long-term outcomes. So I really want to start with, as we discussed earlier, please feel free to share questions throughout. Not having this be an active dialogue, I think we can make it to some degree that piece through questions. And so what we'll do with that is, if anything comes up that you want to dive more deeply into, and even if we can't do it during the course of this presentation just because of time constraints, please feel free to reach out to me afterwards. My contact information is at the end of the presentation. So why family involvement? We know that increased family connection is the antidote to the disease process, and that it brings people together rather than fosters and facilitates the isolation that active addiction loves to thrive on. So our goals with family involvement are focused on the common enemy, which is the disease of addiction. We're going to be working with families through recovery on parallel process. We know that within the family system, every single person within the system is impacted by active addiction, not just the identified patient. And so with that, we're looking to increase empathy on everybody's part for their role within that system. And so there can be decreased blame for the symptoms associated with active addiction, whether that's in early recovery, whether that's in active addiction, long-term stable recovery, reducing blame, discussing shame, blame, all those aspects that complicate long-term stable recovery are what we want to address with family involvement. Our goal with decreasing shame and family isolation is to really make sure that we're setting an example for that the family is not alone. The identified patient is not alone. There's a system around a system. And that's really what family involvement in an addiction treatment setting is all about. And so we're educating not only the patient, but the family about the disease of addiction. What we've found is to truly engage the system, it requires education, because so often, especially if people have gone through the whole continuum of starting from an outpatient model, going up through the ranks, as we know insurance tends to dictate, we know that there's oftentimes a slanted focus on the individual getting well. Get them all the resources, put them in front of the best therapists, put them in front of the best doctors. Let's get them on medication. Let's figure out what's going on. Let's get them in front of a psychiatrist. But at the end of the day, unless the whole family's educated about the family process of addiction, it's really difficult to sustain long-term change and wellness. So we're also working with family involvement on improving communication. And with that, there's increased hope as trust is rebuilt. When we see somebody who comes into one of our facilities, whether that be inpatient, outpatient, so often the family's not even involved. The family by that point may be the primary on the insurance policy, or they might just be the financial backers for treatment, or they might be out of the system entirely and the patient's on their own to figure it out. And I say patient-client interchangeably just because I've worked in medical settings and all that, so please excuse any political incorrectness with terminology. But with that, when we see them present on that first day, we see a myriad of presentations with family systems. We don't know what we're going to get when they come through that door, and oftentimes the patients don't know what they're going to get. They say, "Oh, please don't contact my family. I don't want them down as an emergency contact." That's one of our first red flags, is that tells us, hey, we've got an opportunity here, but we also have to tread lightly and make sure we engage the patient properly to give us an opportunity to become a part of their system. So a family that's organized around recovery rather than disease is our ultimate goal. And with that, what we're trying to do is change the narrative, and we'll talk a bit about narrative therapy as a means to systemically embrace the family. But addressing the narrative for the family surrounding addiction is imperative, especially in early recovery, because it's such a fragile time. It's such a difficult time to stabilize. So in our setting, what we really want to focus on, and just in family therapy work in general with addiction treatment, is understand the narrative surrounding active addiction, relapse, just every aspect of that addictive process. It's integral to understand what the narrative of the family has been, and not just the family-wide understanding, because all of the individuals within the family system will have a different narrative about what the issue is. Sometimes it's blame, it's that person did this and they don't take responsibility for it. But oftentimes, just discussing as a system the unique narratives that are brought in, there's a really beautiful opportunity for just creating a new narrative, and one narrative that is across the system. It's a collaborative narrative that seeks to redefine what wellness could look like, or what the struggle has looked like. And in doing that, that narrative piece, which we'll get more into, we're really trying to bring the family together to discuss as a team their battle with active addiction, rather than talking about the identified patient's battle with addiction, because, as we said, it's a family process and family disease. We're also working on realistic expectations and relapse prevention plans. So we're really trying to, like I said previously, combat the fix them and send them back mentality, which is a setup for failure. When we talk about a bubble, right? In residential treatment, they're in this beautiful little bubble. It's a really nice setting. It's safe to go through things because maybe they're not engaged with their family system or all the triggers in the outside world. They're in this beautiful little bubble that makes it really easy to work through things, or at least address things. It's fairly safe. And then they go back, and they go back to their families very often, unless, like Harmony Foundation, you have a great transitional living program like we have down in Augusta and in a few different locations. If they don't immediately engage in transitional living and they go back into their family system, um, which is inevitable regardless, it can be incredibly complicated, because they're going back into the same set of expectations, the same set of dialogue, the same relationships that could have been reinforcers or triggers for that early use, that shame, blame, guilt, all those components of active addiction. So that's why we address the entire system. So part of this comprehensive relapse prevention plan, and we actually do family relapse prevention plans, and we find that that's incredibly effective, not only for engagement of the family, because they feel like there's a role for them to play in the family's battle with the disease of addiction, but we're identifying family triggers. What happens within the system when there's active using, if there's a relapse, or if there's emotional disconnect or discord, what happens when there's stress, anxiety, what happens when somebody goes off and is struggling with depressed mood. What does the family system do surrounding those triggers? How are all the actors playing it out? We're creating a plan around those triggers for both the identified patients and the family members associated with them, because we want, one, everyone to recognize their role. And in that, we give them the opportunity to say, is this how you'd prefer to manage that situation? And obviously, most of the time, everybody's like, no, I wish I could do this. Or, yeah, I have no other option. This is all I'm able to do. And kind of be in this survival mode place. And so, really, we're working to identify the pattern behavior around triggers within the family system, and then come up with some game plans for how to act differently if there are those triggers. And not all of those triggers are going to be active use. They're often the red flags that lead to chemical relapse, because I think as most of the people on this call know, if not all of us, relapse happens long before the substance is used. And so to teach the family, be a part of that family educational process of how do we manage triggers to mitigate relapse potential, that's the hallmark of family involvement as well. So we are working to create a plan. Should there be a chemical relapse, the action steps to take, educating so there's all the same language spoken and everyone can grow together, because very often, like I said previously, there's really a struggle to have a common language surrounding active addiction, even talking about PHP. That's why I explain what partial hospitalization programming is, because the amount of jargon in our industry is exceptionally high as well. So just educating families, giving them the tools and the resources and the knowledge to feel like they can own the process a little bit and speak to it and become a subject matter expert on what treatment looks like, on the disease of addiction, teaching them about brain, just how the brain operates in relation to active addiction. All of those elements go into family involvement and engagement. Removing anxiety from the family system is something we focus on, working through self and recovery for family members. And we know that anxiety is not going to be absent from the family system. It's all in how anxiety is managed, handled, and how everyone navigates that. Because, like I said, a few points above, anxiety is one of those family triggers. And so understanding and mapping out family response to anxiety is one of our early goals. And if you have any questions, please feel free to type them out and we can go from there. Some of the barriers to family engagement. The first one we have is denial, and that happens so often. And we see that not only in the identified patient, but the husband whose wife is coming to treatment because she's got an alcohol issue, and he thinks, you know what, we're just going to the club and we're just having a drink with dinner. Why is it an issue? Really not wanting to change lifestyle is one of those pieces that reinforces denial, or not wanting to own a perceived label is just all the shame and guilt associated with denial. So when we're addressing denial, we really have to speak to it. We have to open up to it. We have to out ourselves in relation to it. And that really takes a tremendous amount of insight and education to work through. We also, especially in the inpatient setting, but also in the outpatient setting, family exhaustion is a huge barrier for family engagement, because we may have people who've come through treatment. This is their 20th treatment stay. And we always ask, well, what are they going to do differently this time? How are we going to do something different that makes this meaningful, especially with our payer sources, right? So exhaustion, to combat exhaustion, it takes validation off the bat. It takes relationship. It takes understanding and really having them come into a safe place where there's not necessarily expectations on them in the beginning, and just you being here is a meaningful part of the process. So understanding exhaustion and not trying to continue to just motivate, but meet them where they're at before motivation happens, can be one of those integral pieces to getting families engaged in treatment. A lot of families, pretty much all families, come in discouraged. They may be hopeful about the course of treatment they're about to engage in, but discouragement is so easy to fall into. One of the biggest indicators of relapse is that shame, guilt, and failure spiral. And it's not just the identified patients that are experiencing that. It really is the families as well, because it's, why couldn't I help? Why didn't I see it before? Or how did I not know that this could have been helped if I had just gotten them to a doctor, or if I had just talked to them? So there's so much unhealthy narrative in there that can't be helped. It's a normal part of the active addictive process within a family system. But recognizing that is imperative. Resentment, right? That's one of those things that, for anyone on the call who's got a therapeutic background, that presents in the therapy room 100% of the time. When there is resentment, it's a roadblock, right? It pops up as one of those barriers, one of those walls to moving forward. So even if it looks like you're making progress, that resentment, that unspoken resentment, is what pops up. in the final hour and really gets in the way of progress, cuts it out at the knees, really. So addressing resentment, and again, it's part of that outing process, that open, honest, safe place that we engage through parallel processing with families. And when I say that, I mean getting families in the same room and discussing it, then engaging in robust family therapy in tandem with individual therapy. So we try to hit it on an individual, couple, family, and multifamily level to engage all of these barriers. Um, then the last is lack of hope, and that really goes with all the other elements on this page as well. So when you have a lack of hope, it's really difficult to feel motivated to engage. And so what we're doing with that is emphasizing a life worth living and a life of purpose, and that doesn't just come from the identified patient being sober. It comes from a lifetime of recovery and a family lifetime of recovery. So engaging in hope-seeking behavior through recovery behaviors and recovery family systems. So that was a little bit just about how we engage some of those barriers and address family engagement. Now, this is near and dear to my heart. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist by training, but I have been out of doing direct patient care for a number of years now, just being in operational roles, which I do love. But going back and doing this presentation was such a kind of a neat reunion for me with my roots, which is understanding family systems work and family systems theory, because even in management, it really is all systems work. So going back and studying all of these theorists and the modalities and what we're looking at has been really enjoyable for me. So I appreciate this opportunity. So brief history of family therapy. What is a family? And this is anyone who's instrumental in providing support, maintaining the household, providing financial resources, and with whom there's a strong and enduring emotional bond may be considered family for the purposes of therapy. And so obviously over time, the definition of family has evolved, and it really is more about who's instrumental, who is influential piece. And it doesn't mean who's driving the ship, but who's got emotional influence, who's got emotional ties to the direction the system goes. And then also, what is family therapy? And it's a collection of therapeutic approaches that share a belief in family level assessment and intervention. And marriage and family therapy really developed in the 1950s. And even before that, systemic therapies were starting to come about before that. But it really took a systems approach when there was, at the time, a very individualized approach to pathology. And so what we were seeking to do is understand the whole is more than the sum of its parts, and know that we have to look on a more macro scale to conceptualize issues. Because if you take one piece and you put it back in, and that one piece is changed, but the rest of it isn't changed, it doesn't fit the same anymore. It doesn't work the same anymore. And oftentimes it just has to go back to the way it was to fit back in. And when that's the case, and you're looking at that from a macro level, it becomes exceptionally difficult to have change happen within a system. And for change to be long-term, lasting, meaningful, it really must be systemically driven, because otherwise you're just subject to the next landmine, which is rigidity. And so we're looking at marriage and family therapy and understanding that parts are interconnected, that systems are always seeking stability, right? That's even what we're doing when we use, right? Drinking or drugging is all associated with seeking homeostasis, this place of okayness. And that's what everybody does. That's very normal. It's just part of the human condition, is seeking homeostasis. And so understanding that in context of a family system is really what drove marriage and family therapists. And there's the strategic school of family therapy, which spoke to family members perpetuating problems by their own actions. So really understanding that through working strategically with the family system, you can induce change by strategically changing placement, relationship, prescribing dynamics that really offer change. And the directives are tailored to the needs of a particular family and can bring sudden and decisive change. One way that we can do strategic work here in an addiction treatment center is we'll prescribe how somebody's going to react the next time a situation comes up. So the next time that something's forgotten in the home, a task is forgotten, and it's always been the father who gets angry. That's been the go-to. And then everybody's scared of the anger, so everyone kind of scatters. Mom gets quiet if it's mom, if it's another dad, whatever that may be. Children, one gets blamed, one runs away, one tries to fix, right? We have all of these moving parts within the family system. Our goal within the strategic school of family therapy will be prescribe different actions when that next trigger happens. So, Dad, I understand you're going to feel angry, but this time what I really need you to do is say, hey, Mom, how are we going to handle this? Asking his wife how she'd like to navigate it, tossing some power in a different direction, tossing some hierarchy into question, and really strategically intervening with the family system to reconvene around the issue. And that usually seeks to spark change. With structural family therapy, which was Salvador Minuchin, and a number of other people involved over the years, families are using a limited repertoire of self-perpetuating relational patterns, and the family members divide into subsystems with boundaries that regulate family communication and behavior. Um, we can see this in the workplace with cliques and other unhealthy behavior patterns that come up between people, and there's all these negative dynamics or positive dynamics that really reinforce uh, the system, that reinforce the structure of the system. So, in order to shift family boundaries, we're really engaging the therapist or the people who serve in a therapeutic role with the family are engaging with the system. They become a part of the system and they seek to shift hierarchy within that to have systemic change. So, shift family boundaries. So, the boundary between parents and child is clearer. This really came about too, working with schizophrenics, but also understanding um, that a lot of this work was a parentified child, and so often a parent or child was in an irresponsible or inappropriate level of responsibility or power, and so it's rebalancing within the family system to alleviate the responsibility or increase the responsibility for those where responsibility should lie, and having appropriateness in that, as determined by family and clinician, to really try and seek a homeostasis that was functional for the system and didn't break people apart. And the interventions are helping parents to work more cooperatively together and reduce the extent to which children assume parental responsibilities. And so, what this looks like in addiction treatment really is oftentimes, we see two parents or a parent and three siblings. One of the siblings is the identified patient. And it's really two against one, right? They've teamed up. This is a person who's destroying our family. They're the problem. This is the issue. It's really empowering that parent to be in a position of authority, if appropriate, depending on the age of the patient, dynamics, whether there's any trauma, abuse history, understanding all of those dynamics, but really working with the system to engage in healthy structure. Then also a big piece of the work that we do in family therapy is solution-focused brief therapy. And this was developed by Steve DeShazer and Insoo Kim Berg, and this was up in Milwaukee. And this was really future-focused, goal-directed, focuses on solutions. So in this model, we're not problem-focused. We're really focusing on if it could go well, what would it look like? And then working from there. Have you ever done it this way? How can we work in that direction? So the therapist becomes a curious observer, and they're present, but the overarching goal is curiosity. So you serve as a detective in that family system, and the questions lead to ever-present solution for the problem. So has there ever been a time in your family where the identified patient was not the one everybody was talking about, was okay? Or has there ever been a time in your family when anxiety wasn't present? What was going on? And digging into those components and really becoming a detective for solution. So the theme of the intervention is to reframe unsolvable problems as solvable. That we've been at this for years, it's never going to get any better. Well, we can work through that piece by identifying what solutions would look like here. And a lot of that can be done through the use of the miracle question. And, this is a common therapist toolbox question, but this really is, if you went to bed tonight and a miracle occurred, and you woke up tomorrow and the issue was resolved, what would it look like? What would you be able to do differently? So if you feel like it's bravery that you're lacking in the situation, or assertiveness, what would assertiveness look like? Is there a time you've ever been assertive? Oftentimes they start with, no, that's not something I've done before. But when you really become a detective and curious and even redefine the narrative, you'll often find there are many examples of bravery or assertiveness, and you can help to empower the patient and the family system through recognition of alternatives. And so there's a few works by DeShazer there, Keys to Solution in Brief Therapy, Words Were Originally Magic, which is my favorite. And then narrative therapy, which you've heard me reference several times, developed by Michael White, I believe in Australia, and developed with David Epstein in the 1980s. The therapist is a collaborator in creating a coherent narrative of the patient's life, and we really spoke a bit about this earlier. But our emphasis here is really on co-creating a functional narrative. It's not, I'm bad, I'm the addict, I'm broken, I'm unfixable, I'm unlovable. It's recognizing those narratives and rewriting those narratives. And it's not just saying something overwhelmingly positive to change the tone. It's not every time someone says they're bad, you say they're good. It's really an opportunity to reflect back on what were you taught about situations like this? What was your narrative for what somebody who struggles with addiction looks like? What is your narrative, your family narrative of someone who struggles, or somebody who's divorced, or somebody who doesn't want to get married? What are your narratives surrounding that, and understanding that in relation to the patient or identified patient or family system's conceptualization of where they're currently at, and whether any of these faulty, and we call them, just dysfunctional narratives, because if we get into faulty, that sounds more CBT-ish. But it really all overlaps to some degree, because we're recognizing dysfunction within that narrative and providing opportunity to co-create effective, functional, healthy narratives that help drive long-lasting, purposeful living. The goal is to engage patients in conversation that increase experience of personal agency. Recovery behaviors are agreed to, relapse prevention planning. Relapse prevention plan truly is a shift in narrative conceptualization, because we're saying, if this occurs, then this will happen. When in the past, when this happened, they were unable to attain this. So it's really a much more problem-focused understanding of active addiction or failure. So we're really seeking to give them the authority to redefine what happens next. And that's all aided by narrative therapy. It's non-pathologizing in nature, so it explores the effects that problems have on a person's life rather than labeling the person as the problem, which is what we seek to do with our Addict Brain Recovery Mind curriculum here at Rivermend. And few empirical studies on the practice in terms of long-term effectiveness, because it's really challenging to quantify that type of data, but you can see it every day in our practice and a number of practices when you have people that are working to rewrite their narrative and rewrite their stories and develop purposeful, meaningful, driven lives. So the publications for narrative therapy include Maps of Narrative Practice, Narrative Means of Therapeutic Ends. And again, if anybody wants to contact me, I have all these on my bookshelf right next to me. But if anybody reaches out, I can always send you a picture of the book, or I can send you any other info for ordering, anything like that. And Bowen Family Systems Theory is one of the most powerful, in my opinion, of conceptualizations, especially in addiction treatment, because what we're doing with that is we're looking at multi-generational transmission processes, and this is understanding how emotion is handled within the family system, but not looking at the family of origin. I'm going to look at how the family of procreation, which is, me, my wife, and my children, is informed by my family of origin, my wife's family of origin, what that emotional unit looked like, the influence of that emotional unit on my family of procreation, how my wife's family of origin is influenced by her parents' families of origin, and understanding how emotional information has been driven down the generations. And so it views the family as an emotional unit and uses systems thinking to describe the complex interactions. And this is where we see a lot of that old early addiction therapy language of enmeshed and um, just all those lines on the genogram, all that kind of stuff that would be out there, family conflict, cut off, all that kind of stuff. That really is bone family systems work. So as anxiety goes up, the emotional connectedness of family members becomes more stressful than comforting. And I learned long ago, and I've used this in running groups for a long time, especially anger management groups. When anxiety goes up, options go down. That's kind of one of those hallmark pieces of understanding. As anxiety goes up within the family system, what are the roles? Where do people go with it? How is anxiety understood? And what's the response to it? So, with bone family systems, the emotional problem bound in one of three patterns of emotional functioning. Those are conflict between the people within the relationships, um, and there's adaptation by one to preserve harmony. And so that's why you often hear the skipping of generations. Well, my dad was super angry, so I'm much more passive. I'm quiet. And that's what that is. That's understanding that emotional unit within a transgenerational transmission of emotional process. So there's a focus on parental anxiety on a child, and this reciprocal process is anxious. Focus on behavior escalates the behavior. So what that really emphasizes is what has been your role with the primary emotional influencers in your life, and what has that informed in terms of how you relate to others emotionally. And with that, it's also seeking to find ways to be with your family differently, to understand your family differently. And the way that that's actually done in practice is through differentiation. And so this is how one functions in response to one's anxiety versus emotional fusion, which is a tendency for family members to share an emotional response. So this is kind of when everybody's on fire, when one person's on fire, everybody's on fire. And so, especially in the family system struggling with disease of addiction, so often there's this ramp up process. Everybody's not okay. There's this overwhelming process. Um, so, teaching people to differentiate to self care, to be their own emotional unit, and to not absorb the anxiety. And it doesn't mean to not be thoughtful or consider, even though if you look back at maybe some Bowen's writings, it seems a bit more harsh than today's interpretation. But it really was understanding that um, you have to choose the direction you go emotionally to be able to contain that to yourself. And really, you can think about it being swept away on a wave, being your own boat, able to navigate onto a different wave, and not everybody being subject to the same wave. Because if you're not paying attention, if you're not taking care of yourself, if you're not taking care of the ship, the ability to get caught all in the same wave goes up tremendously. But if you're actively processing where you're going with things, and you know the direction, and you have the skill set, and you know where you are currently, you're more likely to be able to sail in the direction you want. So there's really just it's about awareness, insight, and intentional placement of your own emotional information. So, some of the history of family therapy as it relates to addiction treatment. Al-Anon is a tremendous resource for our families. We make that referral consistently, whether that's their first time in treatment or their 30th time in treatment. Just having a place for parallel processing, a resource. Again, we know that isolation is what active addiction loves and craves, and that's one of the biggest triggers for relapses is isolation. And that doesn't just have to happen for the identified patient. That's also the family members who are trying to work on their ability to be present or care differently or be um, less likely to engage in destructive behaviors. So, as early as 1939, families and friends of alcoholics attended AA meetings with the alcoholic, and as families shared with each other, they discovered the benefit of living by the 12 steps and how this improved their relationships, which often remained difficult. And even after the alcoholic became sober, eventually the relatives and friends began meeting on their own. Um, An ACOA, I love to talk about the laundry list because I think I'm every single one of the characteristics on the laundry list. But um, ACOA is Adult Children of Alcoholics, and this was founded in the 70s in New York. It's really focused on recovering from the effects of being raised in a dysfunctional family rather than the Al Anon focus on being powerless over alcohol. And I found that ACOA is um, really more about trying to understand the influence that transgenerational emotional system has on day-to-day operation. So there's a lot of neat overlap. Um, Sorry about that. A lot of neat overlap there between Bowen Family Systems and the ACOA understanding on the laundry list. So CODA is 12-step model. Altered first step by changing the word alcohol to others, and founded in 1986, and really focused on codependent behaviors, recognition of being in a codependent relationship. And I'm sure most people on know about what codependency looks like in active addiction, but it's really where enabling exists and fostering unhealthy dynamics that help reinforce unhealthy behavior. And it's not just codependence that reinforces using, it's codependence that reinforces unhealthy dynamics that can facilitate either active addiction, relapse, or just a number of other unhealthy behaviors. And then there's Families Anonymous, which is a 12-step program for relatives and friends of addicts. And it's founded in 1971 by a group of parents in Southern California. And so family therapy and addiction treatment. I know we've gone over this a little bit, but Claudia Black is really one of the big names in the marriage and family therapy and addiction treatment, kind of bridging that gap. Since the 70s, the work has encompassed the impact of addiction on young and adult children. It offers a model of intervention and treatment related to family violence, multi addictions, relapse, anger, depression, and women's issues. Writings and teachings have become a standard in the field of addiction. So, at really any strong addiction resource you pick up anymore that has a family focus, Claudia Black will be a part of that. And there's also the Claudia Black Center for Young Adults at the Meadows. She's a senior fellow in addiction trauma program specialist, or was, and so that's a really tremendous program that has a strong emphasis on family therapy and addiction treatment. And her work is really, even down to the graduate school level, served in a significant capacity for teaching um, a systemic mindset within an active addiction process, and understanding the multitude of layers associated with family systems and addicted systems, and just how that integrates. So some of the top models for family therapy and addiction treatment includes the family disease model, which abuse is a disease that affects the whole family, understanding that family members may be codependent and enable, and understanding that factors beyond the individual maintain the substance abuse. It's really our Dimension 6 ASAM criteria. And research provides a solid empirical basis for treatment of the family from this model. And the family systems model, as we've been discussing throughout this presentation, is that families organize their interactions around substance abuse, and therapists look for maladaptive patterns that require for stability. So it becomes self-serving. It's that we can't understand our system if we don't have this person within it that there serves a role. It's the classic model of the child becomes an issue because the parents struggled in their marital relationship, and so to inadvertently distract the parents from what wasn't working with them, the child becomes the symptom. That's essentially how substance abuse serves within the family systems model, is understanding what was the purposeful nature of active addiction. And we know there's so many other elements to it. There's hereditary components to addiction. We know that there's just so many other ways that people fall into active addiction rather than it just being a purposeful use for navigating other struggles within a family system. But oftentimes it's through a really robust and vulnerable um, family system through which active addiction thrives. And so we're not necessarily talking about the every patient, but most of these systems that we encounter have some dysfunction that help to facilitate the degree to which we see in acuity when they walk through the door. So the cognitive behavioral approaches for family therapy and addiction treatment, there's maladaptive behaviors that are reinforced by family interactions. We're changing interactions and triggering interactions. And we're working to improve communication, problem solving, coping skills. Again, all of this really is um, interwoven. You find that so much of this, whether it be Bowen family systems, all the way down to just discussing how we do CBT approaches. When you look at the system, you're looking at the system, and it's either you are or you aren't to some degree. And so I hope a lot of this doesn't sound as though it's repetitive, but that's really the neat thing about family systems is once you conceptualize care through a systemic lens, the opportunity for knowing where to go with things is um, really fairly straightforward because we work as a system. Even in our little office, we've got a number of offices across the state. I'm in Georgia right now, but across the company, and every one of those single facilities, not just the patients, but the systems across just the coworkers, everyone's working within systems. So it's a language that people can speak. It's a language that families can speak because they understand the systems that they reside within, and they can understand their roles within it. Um, so utilizing kind of that example to explain just how prominent systems are all around us can help patients and families understand just communicating around issues, communicating around how the evolution of problems happen. And then multidimensional family therapy, it integrates different techniques. It emphasizes cognition, affect, behavior, and environment. It's empirically based and population specific. So these are some contemporary works on addiction treatment and family systems. Not all of it is just addiction stuff, but feel free to reach out to me and I'll get you any of this information. So some of the outcome data associated with this is behavioral couples therapy led to more abstinence and better relationships and decreased incidence of divorce and separation, reduced domestic violence, and had a favorable cost-benefit ratio compared to individual therapy. So there was more abstinence from relapse associated with behavioral couples therapy. And a study using both family and non-family treatments for substance abuse concluded when family therapy was part of treatment, results were clearly superior to modalities not including families, and family therapy promotes engagement and retention of patients. And from studies like this, one of the pieces that really comes out is accountability. And when you have the family system, not only is everybody changing, but there's a system of checks and balances when a family system is present in treatment because everyone has a different take or everyone knows kind of what happened to some degree. So there's just a different level of accountability and vulnerability in the patient population and in the family system. So another outcome study is Wolitzer analyzed behavioral marital therapy and family systems therapy and concluded the model depended on the identified problem. So focused on communication and family organized around disease. Bottom line is that all the data strongly indicates the critical role family functioning can have in both subtly maintaining an addiction and in creating an environment conducive to abstinence. And abstinence may not be the ultimate goal for all patients today. We know that there's a number of different types of recovery, and with medically assisted treatment, there's a number of different understandings of what recovery looks like. But having the family system on the same page, moving in the same direction, working towards a life worth living, a life of purpose for each member of the family is really what treatment can be all about. It just takes engaging the system, knowing what the system can do together, knowing what they've not been able to do or what they have been able to do really helps define the family in treatment. So I have a little case study here. And so this clinical course, a patient admitted to PHP-IOP for 3 months, which is a standard course of treatment here. and progressed through treatment without significant incident despite chaos with peers and roommates, which is normal. Family therapy was ongoing during the treatment stay and was continued on an outpatient basis once they left. Our goal was for the patient to differentiate from her family of origin so that she can take responsibility for her recovery. Because so often when there's a lack of differentiation, it's so much easier for somebody to say, well, I didn't because of them, or I wasn't able to because they did not step up the way that I thought they could. So differentiation is really owning that process, saying this was my action, this was my outcome. The patient was able to gain insight and remain committed to a recovery process throughout the treatment stay. The family was trained in overdose reversal, which is something we do with every family system here, because not only does it give them a powerful skill set to keep family alive, but also kind of teaches the reality of the situation, especially with the opiate epidemic. So we discharge all family members with naloxone rescue kits here, as well as patients. With that, there were other legal issues in process, but we were able to avoid jail time due to treatment as well. Gained insight into family dynamics and is establishing and keeping appropriate boundaries. She stopped trying to gain parental approval to define her recovery, because every time there was an instance where something was not done well enough, or she was insecure about a process, it would be right to the parents. And if the parents didn't have that instant response of cheerleader or, wow, that was incredible, there was so much shame and failure surrounding that, and it really triggered a lot of craving. And so craving is something, we didn't talk about necessarily as one of those huge triggers, but craving is a trigger, and trigger leads to craving. So understanding how that works in every family system can be integral too. So she was able to develop a support network in NA, Narcotics Anonymous, and has demonstrated an ability to use it when stressed or triggered. She was completing recovery mind training, which is our evidence-based curriculum assignments, and used the model to navigate her recovery. Currently taking course towards new jobs, and was able to stop smoking during treatment. And so with that case study, it really came from a place of engaging the family system, helping identify some of those unhealthy patterns that were tied to a lot of validating being necessary for recovery to be lasting, that relapse had happened in the past due to some invalidating behaviors, some enabling behaviors, and really spelling it out for the family system, really putting a lot of education in place for everybody in the family system to help them understand that, okay, when anxiety goes up, this is what's happening in the system. How do you want to act here? How do you want to handle this? What are going to be the challenges to this being successful? And then putting things in place through that family relapse prevention plan and family discharge planning, where we have an opportunity to say, if then, if when, this is what I'm going to do. So we've really seen some tremendous results as a result of our family involvement in our addiction treatment programs all across Rivermend on the eating disorder side, as well as the chemical dependency side. And without family involvement, I don't know how to do this. Just not only from my background, but everyone who's taught me along the way, I've not been able to recognize how this works exceptionally well if you do not engage the entire system. So I really appreciate the time everybody took today. I am incredibly appreciative for the Harmony Foundation putting on this presentation, and everyone who helped organize it. It's been wonderful. And if there's any questions, this is my contact information. I know it's an obscenely long last name. I apologize. But please feel free to call me or email me for any resources. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Great presentation, really wonderful sort of step through regarding the historical evolution of family systems and working with families. As I'm giving some people some time to just do some last minute check-ins to see if they have any questions, I have a question specifically around knowing sort of the evolution of how these family system modalities have come to fruition. Do you have recommendations around which modalities would work best in working with families, whether it's in an IOP capacity or in a residential capacity, knowing that residential levels of care, and I'm speaking specifically about Harmony, who has a variable length of stay, we know that clients may not stay as long. Are there specific modalities that you would recommend for families when doing a family workshop that would be better and more effective based on the nature of the treatment program?
Absolutely. I think there's a number of different modalities that are effective. I think this is uh, when supervisors over the years have talked to me about clinicians and what modality makes the biggest impact. The best clinicians are the eclectic clinicians, the ones who have a strong toolbox full of different modalities they can utilize at different points in time. But specifically in addiction treatment, what you want to see is experiential therapies that work with the family system, trauma-informed therapies or trauma-informed care, DBT work for the individual, and with the family system, really that I love the narrative approach and the Bowen family systems piece because it really is a multi-generational emotional transmission process. So, when working in a multifamily group, which I think is an imperative in a treatment center, because one, you set an example for what long-term care can look like in Al-Anon or ACOA groups, whatever that may be, um, or CODA, whatever modality they may go to. Um, that can all start in the treatment center where they learn to find comfort and stability in that parallel processing. So it can be Bowen Family Systems work, or a CBT component, and cognitive behavioral therapy has its place, but it also has its common place and should be a significant component of every treatment program that's empirically validated because of the research that supports it. So really, that experiential process, that multifamily systems strategic work really creates robust family involvement in treatment programs.
Great. Thank you. That's a very helpful answer. Have a question from, I think it's Michaela, who's asking, when going over triggers with the whole family, how do you avoid having the family feel as if they are walking on eggshells around the loved one who is in treatment? And along that same line, how do you stop the family from feeling held hostage by the IP and their behavior?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, there's a few ways. It first starts with the interplay of the individual therapist and the family therapist. I don't like for that when possible. Obviously, it's not always possible in every organization based on staffing. You do the best with what you can. But to have a different individual therapist than family therapist so that there can really be some dynamic interplay and exchange and interdisciplinary work. Um, but what I am going to be working on with the identified patient before we even go into that session is emotion regulation, is receptiveness, is openness. Because you don't just go into family work. You can't just go into family work. You have to prime the family, and I think that's kind of what you're getting to. And once that's taken place, once the patient's ready to be present, it doesn't mean ready to be perfect, but ready to be present, and the family's been educated about just how to navigate the same emotional reactivity and regulation components, because we know emotional regulation is a significant contributor to trigger, relapse, craving, all those elements. Um, then we sit it down, and I love to out it. I love to say, look, I know we've been talking about this. This can be exceptionally challenging, but we also have the option of being super honest here and creating and fostering a safe environment to navigate it. And it's kind of the same thing with doing couples therapy. Is I can't do work with everybody if somebody has one foot out the door. Everyone needs 2 feet in here, and we're going to struggle through it. We're going to fight through it together. But we have to, one, have preparedness in place with the individual patients and with the family in separate sessions to get ready for those difficult conflict avoidant families sometimes, or super conflict, the super conflictual families that only know how to communicate through anger and resentment. So it's really about understanding the family dynamics, prepping them separately, bringing them together, fostering a safe, cohesive environment, and then intervening when it doesn't go well, because inevitably it doesn't go well. And that's how you build relationship and rapport within the system. We talked about, structural family systems, of inserting the clinician into the family system. That's really the role that that family therapist ends up playing, or whichever therapist that is that comes into the system, is understanding their role within intervention, within de-escalation. But it takes an intimate knowledge of the family system to be able to do that in a way that's meaningful and long-lasting, and everyone has some stick-to-itness through that.
Great, great. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. I want to thank everyone for their time and for Daniel's ability to spend some time with us, giving us some insight into cohesive family engagement. For those of you that are interested in accessing his slide deck, he does have his email up. You can email him directly and he'll be happy to send that over to you. Your certificates will be sent out no later than Friday of this week. If you run up against any issues and you don't receive it, please reach out to Christy Weeks or myself, and we'll be happy to check and see what the status is. For those of you that are interested in participating in next month's webinar, it's on Wednesday, September 26th at 12 p.m. Mountain Time on Recovery Essentials, Releasing Resentments and Developing the Observer by Gretchen Stetcher. So again, thank you, Daniel, for your time and for a terrific presentation. And thank you to Rivermend.